So this is basically clarification on world building, or rather your direction in world building, so that you don't fall into the trap of building up your world in a useless way. And so the start of this is quite obvious, but your world building should be based off of the objective of your story. And so this objective is not in the world, it's not necessarily tied to the world, the story itself, but it's tied to why you're making the story in the first place. So you must ask yourself, am I making the story for the sake of world building? Am I making the story to teach a lesson? Am I making the story to explore a certain theme or emotion? Whatever it may be, that is what your objective would be for writing the story itself. And so now that you know what your story is about and what's its objective, then your world building should be written to accommodate that. So if you're exploring a certain topic, the world building should be either indirectly or directly tied towards the purpose of the story. An example of this would be One Piece, where a lot of the dynamics that you see within the islands are shaped by the celestial dragons and ties in with the main theme of freedom. And so you see this darker side and these restrictions on freedom across all the islands, whether it be from the pirates on that island or the celestial dragons or some other threat. And so what you see is that Oda ties his world building to his main theme. And so this can be done, the same thing can be done for a story that is more about emotion, or rather exploring a specific emotion, where you would build that world so that emotion is constantly invoked, and you can be creative in how the environment invokes that emotion. An example of this would be the Blame manga, where the environments constantly evoke a sense of isolation and insignificance towards oneself. And so what I've named so far was only the physical environment, and this can go further, where you can also change the way the inhabitants of these locations that you have, you can change their attitude to fit that main theme that you have. An example of this would be the older generation in the Naruto series. And even then, outside of the Hidden Leaf Village, it is both the younger and the older generation that have the issue of the cycle of hatred and viewing shinobi as weapons. And this militaristic attitude puts emphasis on why Naruto Uzumaki is so special in his approach of wanting to understand his opponents. And so what you see is that Kishimoto creates this environment, this world, to show off something that would be relatively normal in our world, which is trying to have diplomacy and resolve things peacefully, be something that is extraordinary in the context of the story that he is writing. And so the world he builds, the societies he builds, pushes forward his main theme, which is to have understanding of one another. And to show off the diversity of what I'm talking about, we'll take the example of Naruto, the story, which is essentially an anti-war story, but puts emphasis on the understanding each other part. If Kishimoto had changed his story to being about anti-war, but from the lens of how horrific war is, then the world building should be set to accommodate that. And so an example of this would be the story, the manhwa Horizon, where the world is brutal and there is seemingly no hope until the very end of the story, although that story goes beyond just war. And so another example would be All Quiet on the Western Front, or Come and See, where the emphasis on the world building would be on the horrors of war, and the society that you see in those stories would be either causing the damage or being horrified by it. And so yes, even for non-fiction writing, this lesson is important, as it creates the atmosphere to push forward the story that you are trying to tell. And so with the previous examples that I've just named, what you would notice is the concurrent thing flowing throughout all of them is that they are about anti-war, but they all approach it in a different way. And because they approach it in a different way from each other, neither are either better or worse than the other, but are supposed to be consumed or watched all together so that you have a full understanding of war and some of the means to prevent it. None of these works are trying to, or rather, hopefully, they are not trying to encapsulate the full experience of war because of how innately difficult it is to fully capture the full experience of a certain topic, emotion, or theme. You can only capture what you can show and then tell that story and leave another story to fill in the other parts of that theme. And so with that being said, make sure to pay attention when you are doing world building that it is aiding your objective in the end. You know, I would say that there are actually a lot of examples that you can give. Even Alice in Wonderland is a great example of fixating your world building towards the story that you're actually trying to tell. But Alice in Wonderland goes further and even makes sure that the characters that Alice is with also push forward the themes, although in a more overt way than what is common in storytelling today. I hope this video will be helpful on your journey to bettering your writing skills, and I hope it helps you avoid the pitfall of overworld building, where you're exploring something for the sake of it, and your story isn't even about world building, but it's about some type of teenage angst or something, and yet you're telling us about the people on the sun. The sun people are always happy and have no problems, and while could be a cool idea, would have no real connection with the story that you're trying to tell. Well, with that rambling finished, I'll see you next time.